you for the introduction, and I'll take the liberty of supplementing my bio, since the booklet hasn't covered the latest aspects of my activity. So prior to joining the Institute in April 2015, I served in the European Union at their foreign and security policy arm called External Action Service, where I was as a space policy officer. And prior joining the EU, I worked in the European Space Agency's institute in Vienna, called European Space Policy Institute, looking into the space security issues as well. The European Space Agency, for you who are not familiar with that, it's an organization of more than 20 European countries investing in the Europe's space programs. So prior to starting my presentation, I would like to express my thanks to the organizers of this event, the Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses, for the opportunity to address this distinguished audience. My presentation, as you could probably see, will focus on space, and mainly I would like to focus on threats to space activities stemming from its dependence on cyberspace. I'll primarily concentrate on the governance challenges related to the intersections of these two domains, and some of the crisis management considerations that is related to preventing and reacting to any incidents on conflicts resulting from the counterspace activities. So the changing security environment has elevated threats to the space security, to the space domain, and the paradigm that has governed it, in fact, since the end of the Cold War. So first, the number of public and private actors involved in space activities worldwide has increased dramatically. It is now some 70 government and other entities operating in space. This has been accompanied by a world that is virtually dependent on space-based capabilities and services. Much has been said already about the devastating consequences of a loss of services provided by space-based assets. I think that a similar thing to cyber, there has been case study made called A Day Without Space, where we could see the immediate effects if space capabilities are disabled. So I think we all would be probably profoundly affected on day one without, for example, global communication system, position navigation timing enabled services such as financial transactions, or the computer run systems, weather forecasts used by aviation and other industries, or satellite remote sensing systems supporting disaster relief and environmental management, among other things. As both space and cyber technologies are inherently dual use, that is, have both civilian and military applications, it is especially challenging to configure an overarching architecture for the governance of both domains that would cover both the commercial and the military activities. Counterspace activities, including those stemming from cyberspace, are of particular concern. Development and testing of various counterspace capabilities increases the likelihood that space could be implicated rather quickly in any terrestrial or maritime conflict. In this geopolitical environment, the transparency and confidence building measures, in combination with a prospect of a robust and often, I should say, asymmetric responses to a crisis, could create a proper mix for reacting to militarily sensitive space situations or incidents. As you probably all know, space assets are complex systems involving not only satellites, but importantly the ground stations that control them and the links between them. As space systems are entirely cyberspace dependent, the space operators are trying to increasingly understand the vulnerabilities related to the multifaceted interaction between these domains, as well as the proper level of preparedness and responses to the purposeful disruption of their operations. The United States, which has arguably the most advanced thinking on this matter, describes several layers of cyberspace relevant to space operation, as we heard yesterday from Mr. Austin. The physical network layer, the logical network layer, and the cyber persona layer, that is space operators who rely on the physical and logical network layers. As I mentioned, due to the global and dual-use nature of both domains, their interconnectedness is then not only a military concern and the threats, and that was also emphasized, I think, yesterday. Accordingly, any space operator, including the commercial one, they conduct cyber-dependent missions, and they increasingly need to understand the threats stemming from the continuous innovation and transformation in information technology. As this audience understands well, an attack on space assets or operations through cyberspace has a number of advantages over a kinetic attack, including the difficulties associated with detecting and attributing the disruptive action to its source. We have heard a lot about this today as well as yesterday. The US is acutely aware of the asymmetric risks of disruption of space activities related to cyberspace dependency. Their concern is mainly with the counterspace activities of China and Russia. The past several annual US congressional reports on China, for example, highlighted the robust development on counterspace activities by the People's Liberation Army. China, Russia, and increasingly other countries understand that information-related technologies, including those that are space-based, are of unique importance to warfighting. These include cyber capabilities that achieve information dominance through C4IRS operation, space-to-ground communications, and ground-based satellite control facilities. The US allocated additional $5 billion for space security, and some say it is much more, to be better prepared to operate what the US now terms a contested operational domain. But it is not only major space powers that are vulnerable to cyber attacks, as evidenced by the destruction of, for example, of a German Rosat satellite in the 1990s, or the cyber attack against India's telecommunications satellite INSAT-4B in 2010, which was actually yesterday also mentioned during the presentation. Russia and China are opposed to what they term weaponization of, quote unquote, and an arms race in, quote unquote, outer space. The prevention of an arms race in outer space has been on the agenda of the Conference of Disarmament since 1985. In addition, Russia and China presented a draft treaty on the prevention of the placement of weapons in outer space and of the threat of use of force against outer space objects, so-called PPWT, in February 2008, and a revised version in 2014. The PPWT construct has been promoted jointly by these two countries since 2002. The draft PPWT, however, has a number of shortcomings, as it does not address ground-based counterspace weapons, including their research, development, and production, which include, besides kinetic anti-satellite weapons, other kinds such as ground-based lasers or jammers. In addition, there is the inherent problem of defining what a space weapon is, a similar problem to cyber. Other vexing issues are presented, such as definition of threat of force. Is an ASAT capability a threat? Is a threat to destroy one's own satellite? What about close flyby of a satellite? What are the red lines here? The draft could also be interpreted as not prohibiting testing against one's own space objects, employing ground, sea, or air-based weapons. The draft also does not include an integral, legally binding verification regime for effectively monitoring compliance. In its white paper on military strategy of May 2015, China refers to active defense, quote unquote, military strategy, meaning We will not attack unless we are attacked, but we will surely counterattack if attacked. Applying such a policy to space would be reminiscent of Russia's pledge at the United Nations General Assembly's First Committee in October 2004 not to be the first to place weapon of any kind in outer space. In 2014, Russia proposed such an approach at the UNGA First Committee in a resolution on no first placement of weapons in outer space. These initiatives also aimed at supporting PPWT referenced above. The no first placement, PAROS, and PPWT initiatives are now being pursued actively by Russia and China, while the same countries are stepping up their development of their military space capabilities. In short, it appears that the political doctrine of these countries is couched in defensive terms, but actually military strategy is more offensive in nature. I think these realities pose a great challenge to Europe, for example, including their initiative on the draft International Code of Conduct for Outer Space Activities, as a number of UN countries reflexively sign up to the arms control schemes such as PAROS or PPWT, despite their current shortcomings. The International Code for Space, introduced by the European Union, promotes rather norms of responsible behavior rather than focusing just on technologies. Interestingly, as we heard from other presenters, China and Russia took a different approach concerning cyber with their draft International Code of Conduct for Information Security. As we heard yesterday also, it uses certain terminology not acceptable to the US and European countries. So these examples all reveal that very different views on security concepts that often impede any pragmatic bilateral and multilateral discussion in the sensitive areas. As space assets support terrestrial military operation and enable information support and command and control of forces, today's geopolitical tensions, including in the Asia-Pacific region, create the potential of miscalculation and conflict impacting the space domain. In an environment of tensions between the major space powers, the transparency and confidence building measures which I mentioned could diminish the destabilizing aspect of military competition in space. They are a useful preventive tool and a barometer of political and diplomatic relations. It is a sad reality that without active diplomacy that enhances transparency of space activities and promotes confidence among all actors involved, incidents and even conflicts involving space domain are practically sure to take place in the future. So the goal here should be to strengthen existing United Nations treaties and principles on outer space, while reflecting how best to address the changed space paradigms, because as many of you may know, these space treaties were agreed upon in the time of the two large space powers in the Cold War era, and since that time, obviously, we have a completely different environment. It is evident that the transparency and confidence building measures alone are not enough to address concerns of countries operating in and through space. It is therefore inevitable that every country will integrate space and cybersecurity needs into their broader foreign and security policy considerations. At an international level, it would make sense to establish an agreement on clear procedures to avoid escalatory spirals and other eventualities. Although every situation will require a tailor-made solution, such an agreement, I think, remains a valuable exercise, especially if substantial penalties for violators are incorporated in any such agreement. So the following two slides, they review some of the considerations involved in constructing a proper crisis management mechanism at the national and international levels. I will not go into, because of the time, I will not go into the individual bullet points here, but they will be available in the paper that will be later released from this conference. So to conclude, as it is not feasible currently to reduce the world's heavy and constantly increasing dependence on space and cyberspace, the security of these domains should be given similar priority as other national and international security concerns. As evident from various governance initiatives, the safeguarding of these domains have already gained increasing attention internationally, and evidence is this conference. This creates a window of opportunity to formulate foundational governance concepts based on realistic operational considerations. The TCBMs, combined with a mature crisis management, could provide the principal foundation needed to establish political level collaboration. It would help to create a framework for the kind of cooperation required in an environment of blurred lines between defensive and offensive technologies and equipment. So I think it would also strike a better balance between understanding the benefits of enhanced cooperation and the security imperatives that are involved in this. So with this, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you.